And today we are going to go over the UWIN camera project with Felipe. And today, staff-wise, we have myself, Lay. I am the community volunteer ambassador for the park. Tori, Riza, Sarah. I think that's pretty much it staff-wise. Riza, where's she? Okay, she's over there. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to do our general consent. So here we are. All right, can everyone see that? Pretty spot on.
Yep.
I passed it. All right, so as a visible disclosure, we'd like to inform any participants that any and all of those Zoom series is and will be recorded. The purpose of this is to provide the Zoom series to those who participated or missed out on the session. It is also provided the information for participants to refer back to. In addition to the visible disclosure, this statement will be orally stated at the beginning of each Zoom series, like I am right now. So I'm going to stop sharing. At this time, we're gonna have Felipe present all of his content. I'm gonna make sure that everyone's muted. We're gonna hold questions at the very end of the presentation. Mute all.
All right, thank you, Lay. And thank you everyone for joining in today. I've met many of you and it's really nice to see some familiar faces, but my name is Felipe. I'm a park ranger here at Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. I am part of the VIP team and I have my hand in a few other projects as well. And I'm so excited to be sharing with you what UWIN is all about. So it should be about roughly 40, maybe 45 minutes. There will be time for questions at the end. I do encourage everyone to use the chat box on my screen. I can see it on the right-hand side. So feel free to throw stuff in there. We have a few staff that could address those. Tori works on the project with me as well, so she can answer some of those questions as well as some of the other staff too. So feel free to throw that out there. Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna start sharing my screen and we'll jump right into it. All right. And here we go. All right, so once again, this Zoom session is to cover UWIN, that's UWIN, and that stands for Urban Wildlife Information Network. There's a few different names that the project goes by, but we'll be referring to it as UWIN or the LA River Camera Project as well. And we have, just to make sure that the poll works and people are engaged, I'm asked Lay to pull up one of our first polls. And I just have a general question for you guys and just to kind of read this virtual room. But when you guys are out on the trail, you're out hiking somewhere, I'd really like to know what is your favorite animal to come across. So if that poll can show up, that'd be really great because you could answer on there. And again, it's just to figure out if this is working or not.
All right, cool. I cannot pull up the poll, so I think, Sarah, you have to do it on your end because it is no longer letting me.
So where is the poll?
Next to the chat where it says polls, there's three little charts, like a little chart graph. If you could click that, it's next to participants at your docking station.
I don't see it.
Ooh.
So
I guess we're just gonna have to put it in the chat. So if you can answer Felipe's questions through the chat, that'll be fine.
Yeah, no worries. We're just trying a different feature on Zoom. And thanks for your patience, everyone, because we're still learning with this, with the program, right, and with the software. So yes, if you could please answer in the chat box, what is your favorite animal to come across while you're out on the trail? And not just, I'm not talking about trails if you're going to the Sierra Nevadas or anything, but I'm talking about SAMO, right? We're talking about our home turf. What's some of your favorite animals? Oh, I like this. Thank you. Yeah, roadrunner, deer, bobcats, rabbits, quails, tarantulas, red-tailed hawks, classics. Red-tailed hawk, more deer, rattlesnake. Yeah, it's rattlesnake season too, so if you're out there, be very safe. Good. Kite, squirrels, badger, saw once. Oh, yeah, years ago, right on. Pretty rare creatures. So good. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do that was really because the cameras that we have out are capturing a lot of the animals that you mentioned. We don't have a badger. I'll go ahead and say that right away. We don't have a badger, but we do find a lot of the animals that you come across on the trails, but we have our cameras out in very specific sites. So on today's presentation, we'll jump into, kind of like Project 101, right? And I was laughing about this earlier today with Tori. This is not like Project 101 Freeway or the 101st Project. All this was just a background, kind of general information about the project. We'll be diving into the volunteer and partner effort and all the support that makes this program and this project a success. We'll look at the current status, where it's at right now in May. We'll look at kind of some of the findings, some of the things we're able to kind of pull out and tease from the data and how it connects to other studies. And there will be time for questions and answers at the end. So if you need to use the restroom anytime, you know this session is recorded, so you're welcome to come back to it at any time as well. And we'll be here, so feel free to step away if you need to. I'll keep marching through. All right. So Project 101. So UWIN, Urban Wildlife Information Network. This was actually started by the Lincoln Park Zoo in Illinois. And so Lincoln Park Zoo actually created this giant infrastructure, this giant umbrella, and there are numerous partners that are part of it. But we work with the Santa Monica Mountains Fund to partner with UWIN and contribute all of our data to them. You can find more information about the big site, the larger big picture project at urbanwildlifeinfo.org. Really neat, really interesting. Lincoln Park Zoo has a ton of resources for conservation and specifically within urban wildlife. So if you think about just nature in the 20th century, one of the ways that I've kind of interpreted a lot of the actions was nature was often put into a box, right? Or into kind of a space in itself, right? Like we're preserving this area, that's where nature is, this is where wilderness should be. And I think what the 21st century is really going to refocus on is some of the gradients of, no, it's not just nature out there, but there's nature in our cities as well, right? And trying to blend those two environments to not make it so this is for X and this is for Y. And I think that Urban Wildlife Information Network is absolutely doing that same, it shares that same, it shares in that same spirit. So Lincoln Park Zoo, again, they've connected with a number of different organizations around the country, from universities to other zoos, to public and government entities, right? Like San Francisco Rec and Parks, the National Park Service ourselves. We have Cal State Long Beach that's in the mix as well. They're our neighbor to the south. The Nature Conservancy, right? So we have some big names that are part of this project. About a year and a half ago, they actually went international and they actually started teaming up with some institutions in Canada. So you'll notice on here, City of Edmonton, University of Alberta, St. Edward's University. These were international, right? And it's still growing. And I think that's one of the big things about this project is we're gathering more and more data all the time. So this project is 65 kilometers, basically stretching across the Los Angeles River. That's roughly 40 miles, so between 40 or 45 miles, but that's about as long of our study area. So it's going from its headwaters, imagine West Hills, Woodland Hills, that's really where it starts. And then it's cutting east all the way over into East LA. So the southern end of the valley wrapping around Burbank and dropping down south. We've separated the LA River into kind of 2.5 by 3 mile grid cells. And so we have 13 grid cells all across this river. And we have up to 3 cameras in each one of those grid sites. We use, to attract animals, we do use this, it's a scent tablet. I wish I could describe it. Imagine the worst thing you've ever smelled stuffed into a bottle underneath a car in the hot summer, soaked in like fish oil or something. Like it's just the worst smell you could imagine. And it's so potent and it really sticks with you. But animals find it, they're just so curious about it. So they're always being drawn to it. and we do use that at our sites. We mount our cameras at about knee height, and we run the cameras 4 times a year for about 1 month each. So I know this is kind of a lot, it's kind of a wordy slide, but to give you a better idea of where these cameras are, here we have Santa Monica Mountains. The LA River is roughly outlined in blue here, dropping back down. And then we have the grid cell sites. So we actually do partner up with all the organizations you can imagine. We partner up with MRCA, City of LA Parks and Rec. We've gotten in contact with Army Corps of Engineers, especially around the Sepulveda Basin area here where the 405 and 101 meet. But we do have permission to be on these sites, and we're conducting data for all these organizations, right? And I think that's one thing that I really love about this project is that it does have a strong foundation in partnerships. I'm broadcasting to you from the heart of the San Fernando Valley, right in Panorama City over here, so not too far. Here are some images of what our camera looks like. This one on the left is when the camera is already mounted up, but we do leave the brackets there year round. And these brackets are usually drilled into either a tree, perhaps a wall, sometimes even a rod. And then we leave those there year round. So when we come back, we throw the camera in, we have a metal casing that goes just right on top. And then we actually use a lock to lock it down. We have had cameras go missing in the past, and that's a real blow to the project, right? Because yes, the cameras cost money, but I think even more importantly, right, is we're losing that data. We're losing the data, and the cameras that were stolen that's just gone, right? We can't see that anymore. I've had a few funny times where I've been looking at SD cards, and then I'm looking and filtering through the photos and seeing what's on there. And then there'd be like sometimes, especially in some of the more urban sites where we do have maybe like a more transient population that's rolling through. There was once we captured actually a guy that was, he had a saw in his hand, and it looked like he was about to like chop down the tree and try to cut it down to take the camera. And then I thought, wait a minute, obviously he didn't take it down. I picked up the camera and I'm looking at the images of him. So anyway, that's just kind of like some of the things that we come across as well. All of our photos do come out in, we have a kind of a set standard for a 3-shot mode. And so you'll see a Bobcat like this in 1, 2, 3 shots. So I'll do that again. It's just 1, 2, 3. And that really helps us because you'll see sometimes like the movements are blurry. It's all motion censored, so it can take shots at the day or at night, but we don't always get a clean picture. Sometimes we'll get their head on like the right side, and then the next photo would just be the tail leaving the frame, and the third photo might be nothing. So there are some of those challenges with how quickly some of the animals move, but these are the protocols that are set forth by Lincoln Zoo and by the UN Project. So why run this project? This is something that I think is just so important, right, to all the work that we do just fundamentally with the National Park Service. I would love to have a long, drawn-out discussion about like why projects like this are important, but just because of our time restraints, I'm just going to jump right into it and share some of these ideas with you. But really, we run this project for dozens of reasons, right? One, we can better understand local wildlife and the corridors that we're using. So we could actually see movement when we have cameras along certain spots across the LA River. The San Fernando Valley is largely suburban, for those of you that are familiar with it, and there is a lot of room for wildlife to be using the LA River. One thing to point out too is with a lot of these grids, our cameras are not actually in the river, but they're within those proximities, right? So think of that 2.5 by 3 mile grid cell. It's usually at some point of that grid cell. And so what we're trying to see is how animals are moving across the city. We can also understand the broader pattern of urban wildlife. We have studies that have been published by other partners that are in the UN project. So from Atlanta to Chicago to Portland, there are scientists and other institutions looking at what coyotes are doing in those cities as well. So now we compare that with our data and kind of pick apart that and say, well, coyotes here at this city were doing X, and coyotes at the other end of the country were doing something different, right? And so we can get a better, clearer idea of what's happening. We can build bridges between partners as well. So I think this is really, really important because if you think of any of the mission that a number of environmental organizations have, we really can't do this work without each other. And partnerships are, I believe, part of the future for a successful conservation. And of course, we can involve and engage with the public using relevant and current research. I think that's one thing that's one of the most fun, right, is when people are actually seeing pictures from their local trails or from their backyards, and they're able to piece together like, oh, I have seen this, or I've walked at that park, you know, dozens of times, and I've never seen any of the animals that you're capturing on this camera. And sometimes I have gone out and I don't see a ton of wildlife, but it's not that they're not there, right? They're absolutely there. This is their home. This is where they build their habitat, but we just don't always have a chance to see them. And this project allows us, instead of using just that anecdotal evidence, right, now we have this empirical evidence. Yeah, we know coyotes live in this area and frequent this area. We know a mountain lion creeps into this neighborhood every now and then, and it's because of the camera project. So as far as the volunteer and partner effort that I touched on earlier, it really is essential. We have volunteer and partners in the field and in the office, and sometimes we have both. So this is a former volunteer installing a camera. This is in Upper Las Virgenes area. But what's really great is we actually had the first volunteer start doing both. He's on this call, I saw him earlier, and it was Nick Boomhauer, but just super eager, super excited, and he's done great work, but he's actually been helping us install cameras. And this past season, he actually had already been trained on the right protocols to filter the photos. So he went through, cleaned those up, and then he turned them in. And that to me is just, seeing both sides of the project is just so rewarding. And so I wanted to give him a huge, huge shout out and a huge thank you, just because I think that that's the right work. All right, and I do want to pass it over to Tori because Tori's been actually working with a number of these organizations.
Hi. Okay, so when we first started the project, we were trying to figure out, do we want to have this effort be just NPS and we will get extra interns and the interns will run the cameras? Or do we want to invite partners to be a part of it and then do the process of kind of like an adopt a grid cell? And so we did decide on that, the adopt a grid cell. So we just started reaching out to organizations that we hope to build larger partnerships with, or those that we already had a partnership with. Like, you know, state parks, of course, we already have a partnership, but LA Conservation Corps, would we like to do more with them? Would we like to engage them in a different way? So each year I ask for a one-year commitment, and it's from January to January. So Felipe shared that the cameras run 4 months out of the year, but they're not 4 consecutive months. So they all run each January, April, July, and October. And that's also to get seasonal differences, or, you know, are there seasonal differences when animals are visiting certain places? So each year, we typically have the same set of organizations that agree to commit to another year. And sometimes they'll say, oh my gosh, that was actually a bit much for us. So we need to bow out this year, and then I'll look for another organization. So we're in our 3rd year, and this year for the first time, we opened it up to volunteers to adopt a grid cell instead of just organizations. So we have, I think, 10 organizations running grid cells, and then ourselves and 2 volunteers that have grid cells right now. It's been great. It's opened doors to say, oh, what else are you doing? Or how else can we partner? And so that's been really cool. The commitment is collecting the equipment each month, getting the cameras out there to the 3 grid cells, 2 weeks into it, checking them, making sure you don't need to change an SD card or cut back some more vegetation so we don't have wind trips, which are branches going in front of the camera, and that's what's giving us a bunch of photos with no wildlife. And then 2 weeks later, getting the cameras, taking back the equipment, and then you're off for 2 months, and then you're back on for a month, picking up the equipment, setting it up, checking it, and then removing it again. Is that good, Felipe?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I mean, you could already start to get a sense of, like, it is kind of a big commitment, right? And it is a kind of a time-consuming commitment. While it's not difficult, it certainly does require you to take that time, that half day or that day to come through. So we're extremely grateful for the partners that we've had and that we continue to have.
And I guess I'd like to say one more thing. Some partners, like Friends of Griffith Park, they'll have a lead, and they have 3 cameras, but they manage 3 volunteers that run a different camera. So it doesn't mean that one person has to do all 3 cameras. It could be that they're just, volunteering to manage the team that goes out to cameras.
I really liked, as we've opened it up for volunteers too, I think it's so great to even pay attention to some of those organizations that maybe aren't like the usual bread and butter, right? So you could think of like state parks or the Naturalist Museum or CLAW, Friends of the FOLAR, right? Friends of the LA River, Audubon. Like, these are all organizations that we'd be preaching to the choir, right? When we're telling them about some of this, they're usually all allies already. But I loved when we started getting other folks like the Woodland Hills Warner Center, the Neighborhood Council, because I think that really shows kind of the expanse that we can have, right? So some of these maybe non-traditional partnerships, I think, are so key and so important going forward. All right, so on the other end of that, just getting the cameras out and then getting them back in is one effort. But yeah, the flip side of that is, what do we do now that we have dozens of SD cards that literally house thousands of photos each? But about a year ago, myself and some of the folks that are on this call, I saw Steve and Phil, they were actually really great about trying out this SAMO Photo Brigade. So this Photo Brigade is a unique group where you meet at the VC. It's a flexible schedule, but it's a volunteer opportunity. And at first it was just open for the interpretive volunteers, right? Those were at the visitor center, but started to beyond that pre-COVID. But it's a great chance to kind of see what local wildlife is doing, and you're the first person to actually see that. So I think that's pretty special. You're contributing to your research, right? Because we do filter the pictures before they go onto any database or before we show the general public. And that's because, as you can imagine, this is a wildlife camera, and there are people all over our sites, and we could find some really funny things in there sometimes, and sometimes some really inappropriate things. So that's what we want to try to filter out and clear out. We wouldn't want to put anything offensive or any image of people doing something maybe illegal on any type of database, right? So we do want to take those out before they go live. And again, with this Photo Brigade, we have talked about kind of unique team opportunities. So those folks that are in this Photo Brigade will have a chance to meet with maybe like one of our scientists, Justin Brown, who leads the park or leads this program. And so there'll be other opportunities like that as well. But all that has kind of been put on pause since COVID. So this is just something that we have been doing. It's been successful, and we'd like to keep doing that as well. So if you are interested, this may be a good opportunity for you too. All right, so jumping into our current status. April, so as Tori mentioned, that we do go out 4 times a year. That's January, April, July, and October. And for this season, it was particularly interesting because of the COVID situation. And we were in larger discussions with other folks from the UWIN Project nationwide. Some people didn't put any cameras out. Other folks still had some go out. I was in deep talks with Sarah too about like what is appropriate. Can we call on volunteers to do this? And in the end, we did settle that where, look, whatever we can get, we'll get. But if we don't get it, we're not going to stress out about not getting these cameras out. But for the April season, we did have 24 out of 37 cameras in the field. So it's over half. And I think that's pretty special that we still got something out there, especially because during this time, it's such a unique take on wildlife in urban settings. If most of our communities were under stay-at-home orders, and now wildlife have a chance to maybe have greater freedom during that time. So I was really excited about this, and I kind of saw that as like a silver lining in between everything that was happening in the world, is that perhaps we can get some really interesting data from the cameras that are put out. So as far as the photo brigade goes, we had cleaned up a lot of 2019 season, and with working from home, I was actually able to finish all those up. So, you know, James, Phil, Steve, all of you guys can thank me later for the thousands of wind trips that were there sometimes. But as Tori mentioned, as I mentioned, right, the motion censored cameras will capture weeds that are growing and flapping, or branches that are dangling down into the frame. And that just sets off this camera and it keeps it going. We've had some cameras completely full within 3 or 4 days because they're basically taking photos nonstop. So that's a real challenge, and especially during the April season when we typically do get a little more rain or a little more sunshine. Those weeds keep coming up. They keep coming up, and we really have to be on them. But up to now, we're all cleaned up with photos. We were looking at what it would be like to have them on a Google Drive. But as we did that, the timestamp on the file changed. So we wouldn't be able to do that accurately for a large number of photos, right? Where we want to keep the same timestamp as they had when they were taken. So we're looking at ways that we could still engage with people. And that it might even just be me throwing some on a USB or like a hard drive, which I know I've done with some volunteers before as well. I know James was here earlier, but that was one individual in which we tried it as well. And it did work out. It did. It was just a little difficult trying to coordinate like what he has done, right? Because we have copies of it. So it just makes a little more work on our side, but we're still looking at ways of having people stay involved. The last thing that I want to touch on as far as current status goes is Zooniverse. So zooniverse.org, this is kind of like this, it's like you could think of it as a citizen science sort of page, because we have this large project that is called Wildlife of Los Angeles, but that's the UWIN project. And that's where we're throwing a lot of our data, and it's so that we can get people to participate in tagging those. So I guess you could really say we have a few steps to the project. One is just getting the cameras out there, getting them set up and bringing it down. The second part would be cleaning up the photos to make sure that there's nothing inappropriate on there. And then the third part would be getting it onto an online database so that the public can now participate and maybe even start learning some of the species that are there and being able to tag them. It's worked out for us well in the past. I think the first time we put it up last fall, it was, I think we got something, was it like 30,000 images that were completely cleaned and tagged within 11 days. So that saves us a ton of work. And on the back end of that, if you think about just like the coding and the data side, now we could split that up by like, where were all the coyotes found? What about everything within the first 2 weeks of April? What about those that had people and those that had people and coyotes, right? We can really start to make inferences in a ton of different ways. So that analysis is pretty amazing, but we can use Zooniverse for a lot of that. And while we have all of 2019 data ready to be uploaded, we've actually hit a few glitches within the system. The first time last week we tried it, it was just something was wrong with the hard drive. And then I know Justin Brown, he's the ranger that kind of manages and oversees the program. He wasn't able to get it up on last night either. So we're gonna keep trying, but it's all ready and it will be put on Zooniverse. So I really wanted to make sure that I hit on that, because as soon as it goes live, I imagine that it's gonna go pretty quick, but I also think it'd be a great opportunity for all of you to kind of explore this website also. So here's a quick glimpse of what it looks like. Even if you were to just Google Wildlife of Los Angeles Zooniverse, you'll be brought right to this page. And at the moment, there's nothing for you to do on this page, and that's because the project is closed. There are no new photos. But once that does go live, we're expecting that people will be filtering through and will be able to identify photos. And if you think, 10,000, 20,000 photos, and we have people that are tagging that, like one, that's just a great way for them to learn as well, but then it's also makes it easier on our end too to kind of filter that data.
Felipe, can I interject? So when he was saying, we had all these photos and they went in 13 days, that is all true and awesome. But that's when it was our first time, and we did a press release, and we got attention, and they put it in some outlets, news outlets. So people were like, oh, cool, let's do this. We won't have that again. So we actually, they won't go that quickly, and we will want all of your help.
Yeah, and no, that's a good point. Thank you, Tori. Yeah, as soon as they go up too, like I'll let all of the PhotoGrade folks that I work with already, I'll make sure that they know too when that goes live. But I think it's just a very special way to stay involved with the park. One thing that we've talked about as well is like putting it on our Instagram or on our Facebook when we do that, and if need be, then we can absolutely do that as well. So here's kind of an example of what it looks like. I mentioned earlier that the cameras take 3 shots, and you can see the 3 bubbles that are at the bottom of that photo. It'll show you those 3 shots, and with those 3 shots, then you should be able to identify, ideally, what that species or what that animal is. And on the right side, we have a list of different animals that it could be. So it could be coyote, gray fox, gray squirrel, red fox, domestic cat. But you'll have a chance to look through those, tag it. And once we get once we get 9 people, was it 9 or 7 or 9 people that tag it, on the back end, it kind of like saves it for us, and it lets us know, hey, this is finished. So that top left corner, it says, this animal was tagged like 7 or 9 times as X. And then we can go in and verify that as well. So with that said, I have a question for you all. As for my photo brigade, they've probably seen this photo, but for everyone else, take a look at this one photo. And if you can, on the chat box, go ahead and type in what you think this animal is. And maybe Tori or somebody that has access to the chat box can be reading out some of these answers.
Lots of domestic cat answers, bobcat answer so far.
Great. Yeah, so the nice thing, and in this case, I didn't bring you all 3 photos, right? But ideally, we'd be able to see that animal moving too, so it gives us a few more clues. But yeah, on Zooniverse, 7 out of 9 people identified this animal here as a bobcat. While it's a little grainy, but you could actually see a longer tail, and this is in fact a domestic house cat. But again, for somebody maybe that that is unfamiliar with some of these species, right? Like you could see how this can give us wrong data as well. So we have to be there on the other end to verify that it is in fact a bobcat or that it is in fact a house cat. But yeah, this is kind of some of the photos that we go through is kind of looking like this. Some animals might be further, some might be closer. And no matter what it is, if there's movement, we're going to save that and document it. Cool, so I'm just gonna run through just some of the brief findings. This is a very similar map to the one I showed you earlier. These are the Santa Monica Mountains here. This is the San Fernando Valley, LA Basin, so Hollywood and Burbank here, downtown over here, and this is all Pacific Ocean. But these red dots represent where a lot of our cameras are located within these grid cells. So it's a nice look just to see where the cameras are. And now we have some examples of where we find bobcats, for example. So on this map here, the dots that are green are where we have documented bobcats in our camera. It hasn't been updated in a while, and there's a few more that I could think of, like this one here in Lower Las Virgenes, that should be green as well. We've gotten bobcats there now. But regardless, we can geographically map this out and start to see where species are occurring. Many of you have seen mule deer in the Santa Monica Mountains. And as you could probably guess, we don't find those in very urban areas. Those are really out in open natural areas. We find skunks as well, plenty of skunks in our camera. And this has kind of been a mix. We have some urban sites where they're prevalent, and we have some more natural sites where they're also present. Raccoons, I thought this was a great shot. We typically find those near people. We do. Opossums. You can see that these are a pretty urban species as well. We find these at a lot of urban sites. Coyote. This one's doing something funny. But we find coyotes in a lot of urban, in the suburbs. We find them in the Santa Monica Mountains as well. There's quite a few that have been around, kind of like just east of Griffith Park in this area, and going down into the LA River. So this is pretty special, right? We know that they're using some corridors that are out here to travel and move around, but it is pretty special when we can find coyotes in all these areas being successful and thriving underneath these conditions that are not their historical environment. We do find cats, lots of domestic cats as well. And I think one of the cool things that we can do now is start to see interspecies relations. So if you take a look at this image, we have a coyote, and this is just a great photo for numerous reasons. One, it has a cat in its mouth, and two, it has a collar around its neck. And that's significant for a few reasons, because we know that this coyote is being tracked, and if it's being tracked by someone in our department, right, and someone with NPS, or if it's a different division or a different site or different organization, perhaps we could talk to them and say, hey, we found them. And if you look at the lower half of this picture, this was actually in Silver Lake. So this was in the neighborhood of Silver Lake out in Los Angeles. But then we could actually start to make other correlations, right? And take a look at those places where we find both coyotes and domestic house cats. And there are several camera sites where that does occur. So this is here near the Sepulveda Basin. This is kind of on the east end of Griffith Park. I can't remember that specific camera. This one here is Elyria Canyon. So if you're familiar with Rio de Los Angeles, it's a state park. This is right up the street from that. So we are getting quite a few of these. Another thing that we can look and find is the volume and frequency of certain species. So I just have a few images, and these are all taken from the same site. This was April 1st, so they're all pretty fresh, but this is all, well, I think most of the photos that I have here are just within 1 week of this camera. So we have a house cat, we have a coyote, same coyote, comes back the next day. This is now April 2nd, just doing coyote things. This one's a little hard to tell, but we have an eastern fox squirrel on that left side of the photo. This is just a few days later. Then at night, we have a bobcat. The next night, there's a skunk. Then the next couple nights, there's actually, this one's a little hard to tell, but it's actually a raccoon. And on this image, you can start to see the little stripes on its tail, which kind of gives us a better indication that it's a raccoon. And now those were all within the first week. So those are pretty significant mammal species all using the same exact place. I'll tell you, every time I've been to visit this camera during the day, I've never seen any wildlife in there. You could think of it as just like a small canyon, and there are homes that are lined at the bottom and up and around. But when I saw this, like I love going to this camera and opening up what it might find, or opening it up to see what photos it's taken, because I never know what I might find. Later that month, we have birds like a scrub jay. And on this rare one, we actually got a hummingbird too, right? So this one's kind of caught right in the middle. You know, $10 to anybody that can name that species, but this one's a tough one. And I'm aware of the time too, so I'm gonna try to speed it up, but just to go back to like why these findings are important, we can connect it to a number of other projects and studies. So we actually had teamed up with NPS at SAMO, had teamed up with Cal State University Northridge, and one of the papers that some of the professors and some of our scientists wrote is this one here that just came out in February or March. But it's a great paper. It's on PLOS ONE, but it's called Effects of Urbanization on Resource Use and Individual Specialization in Coyotes in Southern California. And the wonderful thing about that is it takes place right here, right? Like these are studies that are happening right in our backyard. But I love that we can start to look at coyote and coyote diet and the way they live, and we could link it up with maybe some of our camera data, and we can pinpoint where coyotes are living. We could do regional studies too. So in San Diego, this was from several years ago, but they had noticed that there's this funny kind of ecological role that coyotes, house cats, and birds were kind of like this dance that they were playing. But bird populations were actually going down. And so with the population declining, there was actually a rise of project and housing developments. And so there were more house cats that were in backyards. But as soon as coyotes started moving in, those coyotes were kind of eating a lot more house cats, but that was in turn helping out the local bird population boost up. So there was kind of, yeah, just this funny dance that we could kind of connect to. And when it comes to coyote diets, most of the coyotes in the Santa Monica Mountains are not eating cats. In fact, even the ones that are eating cats in a more urban setting, like those in Silver Lake, are not having cats very often at all. I think the percentage was about 20%, and I can give you the exact percentage too, but we noted that that's not their main diet. They're largely eating other things like your pizza that you threw away, or maybe that mango that fell on someone's lawn that's just rotting, right? They're eating some of those fruits and whatever's available to them. They're really opportunistic animals. Another thing that we can do is connect it to studies from other organizations that are part of that UWIN umbrella. And that's because like they're doing these same studies, right? Species richness within an urban coyote territory in Atlanta, Georgia. They were following this urban coyote couple for a couple seasons, and they were documenting all the biodiversity around them. And that was pretty interesting too, right? Because then you can kind of think of what role this kind of mesopredator coyote plays in the ecosystem, which is still not quite well understood. So we can connect it to all of these projects, including some of our own kind of wildlife movement and corridor projects off the 5 and off the 118. So we have other projects going on simultaneously that this will provide even more information for, and maybe even more points of reference to either support or contradict an argument. And so you win for you win, right? This is, you win, we all win. This is what I like to say. This is what I wake up with saying in the morning. But I think it's so special that UWIN is the largest urban wildlife monitoring infrastructure in the world. We have over 24 cities that are part of this one project, and it's still expanding. So a year and a half ago, it went to Canada, became international. Up until COVID, they were actually in talks with a few institutions in South Africa about trying to be intercontinental now, right? So UWIN itself is still growing. Here at SAMO, we have 36 cameras along the LA River. This work, it requires numerous volunteers and organizations to be a part of. We process tens of thousands of images during each season, and especially during those seasons that are extra weedy, we're deleting thousands and thousands of images too. But I think this work is extremely important because with more urban and fragmented environments, the decisions that are made around planning, even just like what type of wall should we have, what type of fence should this be, those have a large impact on animals. And so if we're working with others, this is the data that can help provide what we could do to help live in peace with animals, right? With wildlife. And so I think it's a very special project for that reason as well. There are a few ways to contribute as well. So just volunteering, like we do have that open, right, for in the field. And as Tori mentioned, that's once a year that we go through kind of new volunteers and pushing some into, or just finally realizing who's with us for that year and who's not. Volunteering in the office, so that's like in the photo brigade team, kind of going through and filtering those photos. But then I do think another excellent way to contribute would be through an app called iNaturalist. So this is it's a citizen science app, but I really like to use the word community science just because I think it's a much more inclusive word that is just especially empowering for the people that live across Southern California. So I think of it as a community science app in which you can take a photo with your smartphone, right? You can upload that photo. It could be of a plant, it can be of an animal. It goes straight to this online iNaturalist database. And from there, it can get tagged to certain projects. but there are institutional, like university professors, museum professionals, other scientists in the private and the government sector that are looking at iNaturalist, but they help identify some of that data. And if you think about it, right, science projects are really great, and like wildlife research projects are extremely important, like UWIN. But I think what's nice about iNaturalist is the fact that you are the eyes and ears for every scientist. No matter where you are in the city or in the wild, you probably have your phone with you, and you can take an image and still be part of that scientific effort. So I'll just end it with this last quote by Justin Brown. Again, he's our wildlife ecologist here at SAMO. He kind of manages this program. And he said, the only way to conserve wildlife is to ensure their needs are included in planning and design decisions. So that's a really powerful statement, I think, where when you think about just Caltrans and roads and all the people that are involved, from neighborhood councils to your local Audubon chapter. So, pretty special. I realize there isn't too much time for questions and answers, and I see like a notification at the top that there's probably been a lot of action in the chat box, but I do want to open it up for questions. And I'd like to remind you all that you're still muted, so if you need to unmute yourselves, please do, and you're welcome to chime in.
In case some people weren't seeing the chat box, I just wanted to bring up one question, was about whether there's a flash at night. And somebody else answered that by saying that they use an infrared illumination so it's invisible to the animals. So.
Yeah, we've had some cameras, not the ones we use for this program, but others in the past where, like, I don't know if it was staff or interns or whoever, but they had left the flash on. And we have some really great photos of bobcats like squinting at the camera, which is totally not what we want. So yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And for those of you that are curious, the one on the left here, the photo is on the upper left. It's from Hollenbeck Park. This is in East Los Angeles, where cats are just strolling by birds and they're not interested in eating birds. The top right is a mountain lion that was collared, and this was found at the south end of Reseda Boulevard. The mule deer at the bottom left is right by the 405 and 101. And the image on the bottom right, the bobcat, this was up in Upper Las Virgenes MRCA property.
Felipe, Carrie's asking if they're Browning cameras. Do you know?
They are.
And I also want to say that every partner who looks, who has, grid cells is always hoping P22 comes to theirs. So Friends of LA River, after a year and a half, finally P22 came across one of theirs and they were so excited. That's a fun little competition they have.
Yeah, this is Sarah. I also want to just say that Felipe talked about iNaturalist, but as Lay pointed out, iNaturalist has been used in many other community science projects, especially BioBlitz. A lot of parks across the nation have used it for BioBlitz. So it's a great app. Somebody asked if Debs Park is included in this project.
So Debs Park is where we actually have one of our pickup sites for our partners. And we don't have, actually, Tori, maybe like, I don't think there is a camera specifically in Debs Park, but there is definitely some in the neighborhood.
Yeah, there isn't. It's not because they wouldn't allow. I think it just wasn't within the area that we were interested.
Real quick, can one of you talk about, somebody was asking about the segment that is not, or the grid cell that's not part of the LA River? Tori answered it just briefly, but could you explain for those not looking at chat why there is an outlier?
Yeah, so grid cell 13 is the outlier, and I think when city council members learned about the project and then were bummed out that their area wasn't included, they said, well, can't you just put another square right here? And we said, okay. So I guess political would be the reason, but yeah.
Let me see if I can get up to it too.
So the other question is, any plans to expand the program into the Conejo Valley or Ventura County areas? I don't think there's any plans for expanding. It took about a year to get all the permits that we got from each of the different entities just to run along this river. And I am not sure that those counties would be considered urban enough to kind of match what the UWIN, what they're asking for the cities. I'm not sure about that, and I'd have to ask Justin as the lead scientist, but it did take a long time. And again, the goal was to have 3 cameras in every grid cell, and in some grid cells, we could never get the third permission from the landowning agency. It got too complicated. They never knew who to ask. So we haven't even accomplished, exactly what we wanted in these grid cells.
And to continue off that, there are other camera projects in the Santa Monica Mountains. Like we have one that's specifically looking at how the Woolsey fire impacted wildlife. And so that's happening. There are camera sites across the mountains for that, but not being in that project, I'm not sure where those are or some of the details for that.
Yeah, hi, this is Phil. I'm just recalling when we were reviewing photos from, I think it was maybe grid 404 or grid 5, the northern part of the Griffith Park. It was a well-hiked trail. Most of the photos were hikers, but then there were some evening shots of, I assume it was P22 because you could see the collar very clearly, and it was heading, I think, in a easterly direction around 7:30 at night. And then the following day, almost exactly the same time, a similar shot, also a P22, we assume. And then the third night, again, a little later in the evening, it was heading in the same direction, and then a couple of hours later, it was heading in the reverse direction. So again, this was a very heavily, hiked trail during the day, and so P22 obviously enjoyed it in the evening too. So they were a real good set of shots. And then also I was watching an episode of, I think it was Tommy, which is a crime show on Channel 2. A couple of weeks ago, and part of the plot was they actually claimed that they saw a murder suspect on the wildlife cameras in Griffith Park. And so I thought that was kind of cool. They embellished the story a little bit because they implied they were video cameras rather than still cameras, but nevertheless, yeah, I thought it was kind of cool that your program made it to Channel 2.
And I thank you for that, Phil. I do want to say this is our project, right? It's our program. Like these are all your public lands. These are all, we're your park rangers, right? We're here for the community. So yeah, I think this is a great touch. I don't want to see you trying to scope out and catch P22 just because you know where he walks every evening. Okay, that's what I don't want to hear about.
Okay.
Hey guys, Nick here. I have another comment about that same camera that Phil was talking about. It was probably right when the sun was going down. There was a person on a night evening hike, and then 15 minutes later, a deer walked by, and then another 15 minutes later, a mountain lion walked by. So it was really cool to see how the people and the wildlife were interacting. And so close in a span of 30 minutes, you were able to see all that.
Yeah, it's so unique. Thank you, Nick, for that. Yeah, I mean, you think of P22, he lives in like 8 square miles, right? 8 square miles. And you know, these mountain lions are supposed to have up to 200 miles like square acres just for them, right? Or square miles just for them. So they need a number of open spaces. But yeah, pretty amazing that that he's living right among us.
I was fortunate to win this recently from the National Park Service. I don't know if you can tell, it was the glare, but it's an iconic picture of P-22 looking over his domain, the Los Angeles Basin.
Awesome.
That is such a cool picture.
That's great.
I know this was just supposed to be for an hour or two, so if folks do have to go, I mean, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time and not go over. I do have, I can put up my emails as well, but the whole VIP program knows how to reach me and how to reach Tori. But if you do have more questions about it, I'd encourage all of you to please reach out. I mean, we're happy to talk about it. I think it's a really great project. And I'm so happy that all of you were participated, because for me, like, we don't have a chance to really share this with a lot of the folks that are like even with us, right? Like when people are volunteering with us, sometimes you don't even know of all the different programs and all the different hands and what they're all involved in. So it was a genuine pleasure to be here and speak about this with you.
Thank you, Felipe.
Thanks, Felipe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felipe, for sharing all this great information and this wonderful project with everyone. And thanks to the volunteers who were helping out that are on this call too. And thank you, Tori, for adding to this presentation and all the work you do with the volunteers. Thanks so much for doing this, and thanks everyone for tuning in to this session. It was a great session. Thank you, Felipe.
No problem. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bye-bye.